back to the conclusion of the matter. I'm Brent Ferguson. Joined with me as always is Robbie Santiago and Ryan Weaver. We're glad that you all have tuned back in today. Solomon wrote in Ecclesiastes 12, verses 13 and 14, "Let us hear the conclusion of the matter. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is man's all. For God will bring every work into judgment with every secret thing, whether it be good or evil." And so as always, with all of these topics and listener requests and everything, always just try to go back to the scriptures and only draw the conclusions that are warranted by the evidence. That's called the law of rationality if you've ever studied logic. You know what it is, even if you don't know the term.
Big words.
That's not that one wasn't a big word, okay? Rationality is not. I've got one in the chamber though.
Oh, here we go.
Here we go.
Mr. Webster.
But if you ever have any questions, feel free to reach out to us at theconclusionofthematter@yahoo.com, and we will try to answer it biblically first and foremost. But as we always do, have some fun along the way with it. I guess I'll just go ahead and hand it over to Robbie as he'll introduce our topic.
All right. Well, I suppose, was this one of the ones that we got a question about?
No, this was just one of the ones I was dumping into the schedule to.
Sounds good.
Didn't we talk about it like a while back though, where you thought maybe we could do some on? Not
I think
the
we
same
did,
ones,
yeah.
but
I think
it
last
was
season, maybe sometime.
You thought we could do
That's
some
right.
of these.
And then Revelation happened, and we just kind of So this is one that we've kind of had in the chamber for a little bit.
That's true.
But
That's two things in the chamber.
that's right. Yeah, we've got
Man's
this topic
ginormous
and
word.
some word to be determined later, and rationality or whatever. So today we're going to be looking at the importance of the home, and I didn't know kind of which direction you guys wanted to take it, but I had a few introductory verses, and I kind of broke this up sort of by category, spending a little bit of time on each of the members of the home: fathers, mothers, children, husbands, wives, etc. And obviously, as it relates to fathers and husbands, there will be some overlap. Wives and mothers, there will be some overlap. But I did kind of want to start with fathers, and I had a few verses down, what the Bible says about fathers. And we could point to a lot of different men in the Bible as examples, but I tried to focus on verses kind of directed towards fathers. And a few that I picked out were Ephesians chapter 6 and verse 4 that says, "And you fathers, do not provoke your children to wrath, but bring them up in the training and admonition of the Lord." Probably a verse that we're fairly familiar with, but the fact that we are to instruct our children, to teach them those godly principles, and to train or to build them up to really serve and to honor God. And we see that in that verse, but also in Colossians 3, a pretty similar verse that says, "Fathers, do not provoke your children lest they become discouraged." And I also threw in an Old Testament one, Proverbs chapter 22 and verse 6, that says, "Train up a child in the way he should go, even when he is old, he will not depart from it." So we see a precedent and kind of a continuing trend into the New Testament where fathers are to teach godly principles to their children, and for them to be raised in a way where they know what God's word says and that they're able to apply it, and not only just like understand intellectually what biblical principles are, but also to be able to apply those things. Because similar, I'll just use the Pharisees as an example. You know, they had plenty of knowledge about the scriptures, but then didn't properly apply it like they needed to. And for the same reason, we don't want our children to have that same level of intellectual arrogance, I guess. So we want them to truly know what godly principles are intellectually, but also in applying them and being practical and focusing on love and kindness and the things that Christ taught about.
Yeah.
But what do you guys have about fathers
Well,
or anything
at a
else?
high level, I want the question, the importance of the home. I think the importance of the home is, I've heard it's one of the three institutions that God established. So that should make it important in and of itself. We see from the beginning, he created man and woman, Adam and Eve, and told them to go create and multiply. And then, to your point, all through the patriarchal time, the Mosaical time, and the Christian dispensation, we see the direction to to teach and to continue to propagate not only families but godly families. I mean, Deuteronomy chapter 6, verse 6 and 7, I always think of this verse when I think about teaching kids, and it says, "And these words that I command you today shall be on your heart. You shall teach them diligently to your children."
Yep.
So we've talked about diligence as doing your best, right? It's not like, well, you know what, I'll just read a verse to them tonight and we'll be done. I think his point there is be diligent, do your best to teach your children. And then he goes on to say, you shall talk of them when you sit in your house, when obviously you sit in your house with your family, and when you walk by the way, and when you lie down and when you rise. So what's left in the middle there? A lot of that's done with family, right? Now, 24/7, I mean, I don't know that that's the expectation. I mean, you know, we talk about baseball, basketball. We talk about sports.
Right.
We talk about other things, our family. But I think that we don't need to neglect what we've been instructed.
Well, when I read that passage specifically in Deuteronomy, I always kind of think of the idea of every time you have an opportunity, which doesn't necessarily mean 24/7.
Right.
But like I think about
Teaching moments?
Yes.
teaching moments. Like whenever I was growing up, I know I've made jokes about this in my preaching and teaching, but there were times, you know, we lived 45 minutes from the church building, and there were times that maybe some other kid or maybe something else happened where somebody did something that they weren't supposed to do, and I would get lectured for it for 45 minutes in the car. And at the time, I was like, I didn't do this. Why am I the one that's getting a lecture right now? But I realized it kind of falls along in that line. Hey, this happened. You know, we're going to use this as an opportunity to teach about whatever circumstance it was. And so I kind of think of that when reading Deuteronomy chapter 6. I kind of wanted to hit on a little bit of the high level stuff too. But I do have something I want to come back to at the father's side of it. I looked up I just have one main statistic for this because I was thinking about the dangers of broken homes. And I looked up, and it was in a Pew Research article, but it was a statistic from 2019 that said that in America, 23% of children grow up in single-parent homes.
Wow. What was that, 2019?
2019. And I did see a statistic for 2024 that I think it was up to like 26%. But the only place I ever saw that number was in a Facebook article. So I was like, yeah.
Did Abe Lincoln write it?
Yeah, I don't know. So I didn't want to put too much stock in that one. But that's a shock. I mean, it's almost a quarter of the kids in America. And we're the worst. That was the other thing. That's the highest rate in any other country in the world. We're the worst. And I know that there's a lot of reasons for that can be outside of somebody's control. If your spouse dies, that's beyond your control. But it's still kind of shocking. And looking at a lot of the repercussions that come from that, I've got a list of different problems that specifically the children can grow to have. But it's true of the adults as well. They're more prone to have excess levels of stress and anxiety. They're more prone to depression, having low self-esteem, aggression, being rebellious, having trust issues, and even because I in a way grew up in a broken home. My parents are divorced. I do have step parents, but I remember one of the things, just going through that process of like you have to pick between parents when you're a kid, and that's a really hard thing to do. I think it was when you turn 14, at least that's the way it was done for us. You could sign an affidavit saying that you wanted to live with this parent or that parent, and so it was kind of like, you know, in those formative years, you kind of almost have both parents trying to convince you to live with them. And it's just a lot for a kid to deal with. And so it's hard.
I've heard people say kids are resilient. They are, but
They
you
are.
don't know what's happening under the shell.
Yeah.
I think that's the part. And it doesn't show itself until possibly years
Yeah.
later.
Well, and I was looking at this list, and part of the reason why I mentioned all of those things is some to greater degrees, others to lesser degrees, have all been issues at some point, even sometimes to this day, that I deal with.
Sure.
And I don't know, I've never been diagnosed with anything, but I do wonder how much of that might go back to that divorce.
Yeah.
Right.
But it has a profound impact
Sure.
and lasts for years.
Yeah.
It really does. And, you know, even if like the parents aren't always real like vocal, like very active in like, you know, trying to convince
Yeah.
a child to, you know, choose them over the other one, there can be a lot of, you know, different kind of pressures that can weigh on a child in that way. But, you know, at the end of the day, I think what's often left out is that these children, in a lot of cases, need both of those parents. And
Yeah.
we'll look at those reasons. Now, obviously, I'm not talking about, you know, if they have a parent that's, you know, abusive or anything like that. I'm
Right.
talking just,
Right.
you know, in a general sense where parents get divorced and, you know, maybe they don't get along or maybe they do. But, you know,
Yeah.
those are the kind of situations that I'm talking about. And I looked at that study, I think that you were referencing
Oh,
a few
yeah.
moments
From
ago
Pew
as well.
Research.
But I also found one from UNICEF, and some of this data also comes from, I believe it's a magazine or a blog called Psychology Today, talking about fatherhood, since that's kind of where we started. But those who did not grow up with like a stable father figure, here are some of like the often, you know, prevalent negative effects: diminished self-concept and security, behavioral problems, poor academic performance, delinquency and crime later, you know, in the teenage years, teen pregnancy or promiscuity, drug and alcohol abuse. This study says that 90% of homeless people didn't have a father. That
Wow.
kind of blew me away.
Interesting.
Exploitation and abuse, physical health, mental health, obviously, future relationships, and even in some cases, like a significantly higher mortality rate, like 4 times as high. So that's
Did that one list drug abuse? Because that was one of the ones. That
with alcohol abuse.
Yeah, okay,
Yes,
okay.
but that some of these are, and not to say that those who grew up without a father, you know, that
Are
they
gonna-
would struggle with
it's-
this.
Yeah,
But it's just
yeah.
kind of like this.
That's the trend.
The
Yes.
trend,
Yeah.
definitely. I think the other thing, and you hit on it briefly there, and you said we'll get into it more, but God is very intelligent, and He
Yeah.
did it for a reason. And you stop and think about men go through certain changes, women go through certain changes as they grow up, and they're each equipped for their own
Yeah.
world, and expecting the opposite to be able to teach that or deal with it with the opposite sex child without
Yeah.
it's interesting to see that the expectation of I don't know how to deal with this.
Yeah.
And I think that's part of it is there are a lot of things that the family, when put together, as we see in Ephesians chapter 6 and Colossians chapter 3, is the way that it was intended. And for it to, I'm not saying it can't function with just one. And the reason why I say that is I don't know much about Timothy's dad.
Yeah.
I know
Yeah.
he was not a believer, but the man was still a faithful Christian because of his mother and his grandma, which we see in 2 Timothy chapter 1.
Yep.
And then you see that he was taught from childhood, going back to that expectation of teaching as a child. I'm not saying it can't happen, but I think you have a greater chance of being successful. And not because there are situations where the parents are still together and the children, it didn't work out for the best anyway. But I think that there is a plan, and putting it in play in the way that it's instructed here is to give you the best chance at a positive outcome.
Yeah. And I'm glad you brought up Timothy, because I think that's a great point to make. Because sometimes I think that some single parents often have a lot of guilt just because they understand how hard it's going to be, not only for them, but especially for their children growing up in that type of environment. And it's not sinful to be in that scenario inherently.
Right.
I'll say that, not inherently sinful. And I know a lot of people really wrestle with that idea, and it is possible, like you brought up Timothy, but we're just saying while it's possible, it's going to be a lot harder. Yeah.
there's just certain, I mean, Ryan, you kind of hit on this, as a child growing up, there's certain needs that need to be met by the mother that are going to be received a certain way that, I couldn't give to like a son or a daughter, and vice versa. There's certain things for sons and daughters learning things from their father when, in the right relationship, it teaches them certain things that the mother could not, could say the exact same thing, and it would be interpreted a completely different way. I mean, you even see that, even in schools and stuff. You get male and female teachers, and same student responds differently in certain social scenarios with that. So, not saying that teachers are parents or should be, but just all that to say that there's a different way that
we're different. I mean, the book Men are from, what is it, Mars and women are from Venus, or that vice versa.
Like that.
The point is, we're different. We communicate different. We do things different.
Like our brains are like hardwired different.
Exactly, and we handle
totally
situations different. And I think that's why you need the balance.
I think of this analogy quite a bit. I have no idea where it came from. Not for me.
Spaghetti and waffles,
something like
that.
I've heard that. But like the men's brain, generally speaking, there's exceptions here, but we have like our drawers and our boxes.
That's the waffle.
Yeah, exactly.
The compartmentalized.
So like, we have one box and we like to pull it out and discuss that thing or think about that one thing at a time, put it back. And women's brain have all of those same boxes, but each of them are connected. Box one's related to box spaghetti. 300. And men also have what I call the nothing box, where we can just be sitting there and not have a box open and just like Patrick off of SpongeBob or something, just like sitting there, just enjoying ourselves and not be thinking about anything at all. But women, on the other hand, in most cases, don't have that nothing box. And I guess it's to our own benefit or detriment, or a little bit of both. But God created us different for a reason. So, and anything else that you guys had on fathers, or can we pivot?
Well, fathers, but go ahead. I know you said you did. I had one too.
Because I was wanting to, one of the verses that I think about in this discussion of fathers is Genesis 18 and verse 19. And specifically in the King James Version, so I'm going to read it from that one because the wording is a little bit different. In the context, this is when God appears to Abraham, and he tells Abraham again that he and Sarah are going to have a child. That's where Sarah's in the tent, and she laughs, and God asks Abraham, why did she laugh about that? And she denies it. And that's that context. But that's all leading up to God going to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah. And what's interesting is when God's leaving, I'll start reading in verse 17. And the Lord said, shall I hide from Abraham that thing which I do? Seeing that Abraham shall surely become a great and mighty nation, and all the nations of the earth shall be blessed in him. For I know him, that he will command his children and his household after him, and they shall keep the way of the Lord to do justice and judgment, that the Lord may bring upon Abraham that which he has spoken of him. So God is basically saying, I'm going to go destroy Sodom and Gomorrah, but here's this man that I'm going to be using to bring about the Messiah, to save all of the world, and I know that he's the type of man who's going to lead his family to do what's right. Why, basically he's asking, why am I going to hide what I'm about to do from him? And I mean, you talk about that's being highly esteemed in the eyes of God. But it comes down to what he says there in verse 19. He was going to teach his children to follow God and to do justice and judgment. That's a great compliment.
Absolutely. And we see that same principle carried out there and then also in the New Testament. Ryan, do you have something too?
Yeah, I think you referred to, referred to Ephesians chapter 6, verse 4, right?
Yes.
Well, the part that I'd like to hone in on is the do not provoke your children to anger. And in Colossians chapter 3, verse 21, fathers, do not provoke your children lest they become discouraged. I think we've all seen where parents are unreasonable expectations for their kids. And I think that's
harsh.
What's that?
Harsh.
Very harsh. And it's like, you have to, I think to do this successfully, you have to know them. You have to know their abilities. You have to know their talents. You have to know what they're capable of. If a kid is trying their hardest at whether it's a sport or school or whatever, and they're truly trying their hardest, and you have to learn to judge that.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think you take them at their word all the
Right.
time, but I'm trying my hardest. I'm like, you haven't done anything, anyway, but expecting them to, always be as good as what you were as a kid or as the kid down the street.
Yeah.
Because I like verse 21, and it says, lest they become discouraged. I mean, if they're like, man, you're never proud of me,
Yeah.
I'm never good enough, that's just that's a self-esteem thing that we are not helping. And the other thing is, don't provoke them to anger. I don't make them, angry at the fact that they're going to resent you.
Yeah.
And I think that's important. And I know he specifically calls out fathers, but I don't think that gives the mothers a pass
Right,
to be the same way,
yeah.
because I've seen some mothers that are worse than the dads.
Well, and that kind of brings up another thought I had. We talked about broken homes earlier. I also thought about divided homes, because there are scenarios where the mom and dad are still together,
Yes.
but they're not really together.
Yeah.
And the example I thought about was Isaac and Rebekah with Jacob and Esau. They both played favorites, and look what happened. Well, specifically, Rebekah in that situation played favorites with Jacob. And there are times where it's like, we kind of joke about it sometimes, where it's like, a child goes to their dad and their dad tells them no, so they go to their mom because they know mom's going to say yes. And that's why even being together, you have to be united on those things. And as you're pointing out, not provoking children to wrath, being overly harsh. I was thinking about going to school and what grades you get.
Mm-hmm.
My parents, thankfully, I grew up with very level-headed parents when it came to things like that, because they only expected me to do the best that I could do. And if a C was the best that I could do, then that was fine.
Mm-hmm.
But they knew, to your point, they knew who I was and what I was capable of. And so they knew that a C most of the time was not my best effort. And so,
but I think that's
that,
the important part, is having that relationship and I think it's hard for a removed parent to have that relationship because you don't know.
Well,
you know what I mean?
Yeah, and that was that. Thank you, because I forgot, because I was wanting to make another point about
Ren.
that. To think about kind of the cultural situation in which this was written, sometimes, fathers, and I mean, obviously this is true even today, but fathers could be fairly distant, almost kind of like they just made the rules and everybody just had to go along with it. They weren't really, I guess, nurturing or as involved as they ought to be. To your point, they didn't sometimes really know their kids. They would just come in and punish their kids and leave. And so it's like that's the only relationship that a lot of people, even to this day, have had with their fathers is, you don't really care about me. You're just here to punish me.
Yeah.
And I think that leads to that resentfulness that you're talking about.
And I know we're going to, when we get to the husband aspect, I know you're going to tie it to where Paul ties it to Christ's relationship. But going back to God being our Father, He knows we are trying our best.
Yeah.
And I think that goes back to where we've always talked about diligence is something God expects from us, doing our best. We're not going to be perfect. We're going to mess up. We're going to make the wrong decisions. But God knows that, hey, He's trying his hardest.
Yeah.
Whereas, you gotta God has a different view because He knows the heart. And but I think you learn a little bit of that by having that relationship with the kid.
And that's, I think, why that symbolism's used. I don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves there. One thing, the last few things about fathers I wanted to bring up, because you had talked about being detached, and in that same article I referenced earlier from the from the UNICEF study in Psychology Today, 10.
Do you subscribe to that, Robbie?
No, I just found it, but hey, just giving due credit, because most of the time I don't know where I get what's going through my brain. I don't know where it comes from. But 10 things about fathers' engagement, positive things, attachment, health outcomes, even like newborns and things, when the fathers are present and engaged in that process, they generally have better weight gain, better, they do better overall. and things. Authoritative parenting, which just basically means that you're involved and you have clear expectations. But there's a hierarchy there as well, but it's not like domineering. Future success. I read this. This is part of this study here too, that 2-parent households have 80% less likely to go to jail. So that's good. 75% less likely to be 80% less likely to go to jail. 75% less likely to be involved in like a teen pregnancy. And a different study, I forget where this one came from, so case in point, said that they were 33% more likely to get straight A's in school. And 33% is a high, but, straight A's, that's a pretty good deal. I think overall, like in terms of like graduation rate, I think that was 46% higher. So still fairly, if not pretty significant. So I could go on. Yeah, here it is. It actually is this study. 33% also 33% less likely to repeat a grade, and 43% more likely to earn A's. Yeah. So those are just a few. It has a list of 10 things here. I think I'd rattle off maybe like 4 or 5 there.
And I think that kind of goes back to one of the core purposes that fathers serve in the home, which obviously they are to be compassionate and nurturing to some degree. But as we well know, that mostly falls on the mother. But there is, like we're talking about, there is overlap between these roles, because it's not that the mother is all nurturing and doesn't punish, just like the father isn't all punishment and no nurturing.
Exactly.
But I guess as fathers and as leaders in the home, that responsibility does, I think, primarily fall to the fathers. And so when you grow up in a home where you might not have that standard or that authority to kind of push you and to lay those boundaries down, it can lead to, all of those things you were just talking about and the things that we referenced earlier. Proverbs 13, verse 24. I'm surprised we haven't mentioned this verse yet. He who spares his rod hates his son. I mean,
that's what we're here for.
Yeah. Apparently my parents loved me because they did not spare the belt.
It was like a Sunday ritual at our house. I think
which I am thankful for, by the way. But
yeah, there's one. I think I told y'all this story, maybe not on the podcast before, but there was one time my sister and I were probably like, I think I was around 7 or 8, and we used to get whooped by like a paint stir kind of thing, like I don't know if that's a 1x3 or what that would specifically be, but something like it. And I remember one time it broke in the middle of the process, and so we were like, hey, he's powerless. And I remember he just sighed and went, I'll be back. And we're like, we're jumping up and down. Comes back with an identical one, and we had a meltdown.
10-pack.
Yeah. He's like, just get another one. But no, I wanted to kind of go ahead and pivot to mothers here.
Okay.
And Ryan, you brought up a verse that I was going to bring up as well in 1 Timothy chapter 1. They were talking about that not only were fathers to teach these expectations of God and principles diligently, but you see the pattern from the mothers as well. So many of the things that we've already harped on when it came to fathers, obviously the mothers are the ones that are also, involved in that process too, and teaching. And we see that in numerous ancient civilizations, whether you're talking about the Egyptians, even many of the Mesopotamians, the Sumerians, the Greeks, Spartan women especially, they were, tougher than a lot of other civilizations, but they were in almost all of your ancient, classical, and all civilizations, mothers were generally the ones, while the husbands were away doing manly stuff, I guess. The women, hunting, war, yeah. The women were the ones that were actually teaching values and principles. So you can see that it's a collective effort here. And just for the same point that we made about husbands' necessary role, there's an inordinate amount of credit that mothers are also. I mean, if for nothing else, bringing them into the world to start with that, and for just the many things that most of the time nobody asks about, that go unnoticed.
Yeah, I think Proverbs 31 speaks a lot about that.
Yep.
Verse 15, she rises while it's yet night and provides food for her household and portions for her maidens. She considers a field and buys it. With the fruit of her hand, she plants a vineyard. And then keep on going down to she opens her hand to the poor and reaches out her hand to those in needy, teaching her kids that. Let's see. I wanted to drop down. Oh, verse 26. She opens her mouth with wisdom, and the teaching of kindness is on her tongue. I think talking about to her children, could be to others, but she looks well to the ways of her household and does not eat the bread of idleness. Her children rise up and call her blessed, and her husband also as he praises her. The first one, I skipped a verse here because where was it? The one said, verse 18, she perceives that her merchandise is profitable. Her lamp does not go out at night. So not only does she wake up while it's still dark, she doesn't go to bed until late because, I mean, you think about your mom, and they're usually up before you. They usually go to bed after you. You don't know what they're doing, but they're doing all kinds of stuff.
Yep.
And I'm not saying the dads don't do this. I just think that in this case, he's talking about the mother. To Robbie's point, and this time the men were off doing what you said, manly stuff. But
I'm gonna go lift weights.
But there's a whole thing in here. I think the whole family is found here, because the husband is. That children are thankful. They say, we are blessed because you take care of us so well. The husband is in verse, and men, if you want to remember this verse, it's verse 29, where you say, many women have done excellently, but you surpass them all. He recognized it and was thankful. You know, it's like, so going back to the whole family's here.
Yeah.
The mother sees the need. The mother teaches the kids. She does it behind the scenes. Robbie, to your point, I think you said that, maybe not behind the scenes, but there's a lot of things
that
going
go
on.
unnoticed.
Yeah, unnoticed. But the husband recognizes it. The kids recognize some of it. They're thankful. I just see the whole family unit here in the way God wants it. In Proverbs 31.
Well, you brought this up earlier, and didn't spend a lot of time on it, but just in God's wisdom in just orchestrating all this, and how the husband and the wife are to work as a team and be completely unified, and all of these things. It's not like that the husband's going to be the only one that can discipline, or that the wife is the only one that can show compassion in this home. You know, those things are a shared effort, and we see the diligence of both parties, and both of them working together to love each other, but also, you know, to love and to raise children. And we see that in numerous places. But Proverbs 31 was exactly where I was going to go to. This particular article was just from psychology.com, so this was not part of the UNICEF study. But children, a lot of these needs generally come from more women, I think, than men. But some of children's needs empathy, self-value as a person, and not just as, you know, accomplishments, accountability, values, authenticity, and even it listed a few other things such as like parental hierarchy, just kind of knowing that, you know, that parents are above children in that hierarchy, and then availability and consistency. So those are several of the needs according to that study. I mean, there's others that we could look at. Ren, did you have some stuff about mothers?
Well, yeah, I do. But that point on consistency is interesting. Because just thinking about, because like in 1 Timothy 5 and verse 14, Paul tells the younger widows that they should remarry and to manage their own households. And thinking about that, of course, in the culture of that day, going back to what you were just talking about, usually the woman stayed at home and the man was the one who went out and typically worked. Obviously, that's not a universal rule. We do see women like Lydia working and things like that. Obviously not a universal rule, but typically speaking, that's how it was done. And so the father, though he could have been a very active and present and involved father, just by the very necessity of his role, he's not always going to be there. But mom typically is. And so they would have then that consistency, that dependency, that normalcy through her. I think that's an interesting point. Now, that's not to say, don't get me mixed up here. That's not to say that working outside of the home for a woman is wrong. I think so long as they're still fulfilling their role and their responsibilities, and that just like it would be with the man. I mean, he could work all day long, but he wouldn't be the father that God would call him to be if he's not fulfilling these other responsibilities that he has to his family.
So First Timothy chapter 5, I was going to throw verse 8 in at some point, might as well, because you're referring to the father not doing his part. But I think verse 8 says that if anyone does not provide for his relatives, especially for members of his household, he is denied the faith and worse than an unbeliever. I mean, worse than an unbeliever? I mean, I think this can be applicable. I'm looking at the word his, and it does look like it could be her, depending on, Paul was specifically, I think, talking to men at this point, but I think the case is there that if it, going back to where you were at in verse 14,
Yeah.
If the widow, let's say that she didn't get remarried, she's still responsible for her household at that point, right? And if she's not providing for her, I think God would look the same on her as well.
Yeah.
Do you think so?
Yeah. I think in part it would depend on the scenario,
Situation.
obviously.
Yeah, definitely.
Because if she is, because he talks about widows indeed, and that's clearly a woman who at that point in time was old
Over
enough
60?
where she couldn't, over 60, and she couldn't really take care of herself. Obviously, in that scenario, that's a little bit different. But I mean, Lois and Eunice, they had that responsibility to Timothy.
Yeah. If they didn't take care of him as a child, then I think the same could have been said there. I do think most of the time we apply this to the father figure, but
do you know which Greek word is used for his there?
that's what it's for his own, it's idios, and it says pertaining to self, that is one's own, by implication, private, or his acquaintance when they were alone, apart, aside, do his own home, her, our, thine, your own business. That's when it says her. That's why I was thinking maybe.
Well, does it say if it's being used as a masculine pronoun or a neutral gender neutral? Because we do that sometimes where it's like we use he, but we're using it in a gender neutral sense. I don't know. But yeah, I would say the general principle would apply. Yeah. The other thing I was wanting to bring up, kind of going back to, we talked about the purpose that fathers serve in the leadership role and the disciplinary role. We kind of alluded to the fact that, and I think you hit on it, Robbie, already as well, that mothers are typically the more nurturing and compassionate side of things. Again, not to say that husbands and fathers aren't to be nurturing and compassionate, or that mothers are not to be disciplinary towards their children. But thinking about that reminded me of a couple of passages in Isaiah where God figuratively compares himself to a woman. In Isaiah 49 and verse 15, he says, "Can a woman forget her nursing child, that she should have no compassion on the son of her womb? Even these may forget, yet I will not forget you." So he's saying just like a mother would not or should not forget their own nursing infants, I'm not going to forget the children of Israel. Now, again, I know the extreme feminist would jump on that and, God is a she and all of that nonsense. That's not what he's saying. He's just highlighting the compassion that God has, which is really, when you think about the role of a father and of a mother, we kind of typically specialize in one side or the other. But God does all of those things for all of us all of the time. And he's given us, and he's, as y'all have talked about, he's designed the home, the structure of the home to be able to fulfill that need, especially in the lives of children. Another passage in the book of Isaiah, chapter 66 and verse 13, where he says, as one whom his mother comforts, as one whom his mother comforts, so I will comfort you, you shall be comforted in Jerusalem. So there again, he's drawing on that fact that mothers are the nurturing, the comforting, the compassionate, the empathetic and sympathetic, typically, sides of the family. and even applying that to his own self. This past Sunday, Hazel and Lucas were up there on the stage playing on the stairs after everything. Well, it was during the last session, but they were both tired and hungry and restless. So they were playing up there, and Hazel was playing on the stairs, and I was out there, but Chloe was in the evangelism training, and Hazel slipped and fell off of like the first step, but she fell backwards and hit her head on the floor. And so she just started wailing. And so I picked her up, and I was being as compassionate as I could possibly be, because I wanted to comfort her. I wanted her to feel better, because I felt badly, because she fell one time and I was able to catch her, but then I wasn't able to catch her the second time. And so I was trying to make her feel better, but she just kept crying and crying. And I was just thinking that whole time, I was like, if Chloe came out here, these tears would be gone like that. Because mothers just have that ability. They have that comforting presence with their children.
That happened to us yesterday too, but for a completely different reason. Like later that night, well, Lucas has a bad habit of like going several days without pooping, so we had to give him something for that. And like me and him, like we went outside to play. Y'all know how he loves to be outside, but he was having some issues, and I was just like you, being as comforting as I possibly could and holding him. And
it's hard to not get a little offended, because it's like I'm trying my best here.
I know you're like sitting there holding him, patting him, and he's Mama, on me. So that's just from a young age, and even into the elementary and teenage years, they go to mom for comfort. Yeah. So, anything else that you guys wanted to add on mothers before we pivot for children?
No.
All right. Well,
I think we're headed to a new record.
We want to just split this one up, maybe.
We haven't gone that long,
but we still got husbands and wives. And
y'all want to maybe hit children, and then we'll leave them on a cliffhanger.
Yeah.
All right.
And then do husbands and wives next week or something.
Sounds good to me.
Sure. Okay.
All right. Well, let's go ahead and hit on children.
Or we could just go for an hour and 10 minutes. Let's get through children.
All right.
See how it goes.
Chirp, chirp, chirp.
Anyway, a few verses just about children that's talked about in the Old and New Testament. Psalm 127, verse 3 says, "Behold, children are a heritage from the Lord. The fruit of the womb is a reward." Proverbs chapter 1, verse 8 and 9 says, "My son, hear the instruction of your father, and do not forsake the law of your mother." Again, we see the kind of unity between the two. "For they will be a graceful ornament on your head and chains about your neck." And then in the New Testament, Ephesians chapter 6, we brought in verse 4 earlier, but then the first three verses are talking about children before fathers. "Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor your father and mother, which is the first commandment with promise, that it may be well with you and that you may live long on the earth." And then Colossians 3, we brought up that chapter earlier. Verse 20 says pretty much the same thing as Ephesians. "Children, obey your parents in all things, for this is well-pleasing to the Lord." So, I mean, it's kind of as simple as children obeying your parents, which is very simple to understand, but in practice, sometimes even
very difficult.
Even us growing up, like I'd said, it was like a Sunday ritual at our house. Either me or my sister both getting whooped about something. But I did that same study. I wanted to bring in just a few other things from it of the needs of children, and I kind of broke this up by category too. Things that daughters need from their mom: self-confidence, body acceptance, emotional burden sharing. Basically, having a difficult time about something at school or something in life, and being able to emotionally share with mom. Physical comfort, authoritative parenting, just the idea of being warm but also being firm and having clear limits, and high expectations, not unreasonable, but reasonably high. What sons need from mom: non-coercive parenting, minimal conflict, maximum warmth, encouraging function, and also modeling, just kind of like being an example, and avoiding harsh criticism. What daughters need from dad: fun, acceptance, availability, positivity, Shared exercise. I just gave sports as an example for that. Reliability and permission for autonomy or permission for like independence in situations. And then what sons need from dad. Time, also that kind of fun and sports kind of thing as well. Development talks, the talk, role model. We won't get into that. But role models and being like a true example for them. And then this one was also on there too, tenderness and affection. And I think kind of like what we've talked about at a few times in this podcast is that that dads aren't supposed to only be like all right,
Yeah.
who need bringing
Popping
the belt
the belt,
out,
yeah.
That reminds me, we were on a field trip one time, and I don't even remember where we were. I think we had gone to like the East Coast. I think we were on a field trip in the 5th grade, if I remember. And we used to go like to like some of the islands. The trip was called Sound to Sea. So we went to some of the sounds in North Carolina, and we went to the ocean. Technically wasn't a sea. But we stopped at this gift shop, and one of my classmates like bought a bullwhip, and he's out there like whipping it around, but it's like not making any noise or anything. And my dad like came behind me, just like tapped him on the shoulder, asked him if he could try it out real quick. And like there's like at this gift shop there's like a whole deck, and like there's probably 20, 30 5th graders out there. And my dad's just like in the parking lot like cracking that whip.
I thought you were about to say he like hit a
No,
kid in the
we're not like
face
lining
with
up
the
for
whip.
like no, nothing like that. But like we're just like sitting there watching. And I told one of my friends, I'm like, it's like this at home too. It's a joke, and they may not have realized I was joking, but now my dad does have a bullwhip at home, but he never used it on us or
Well,
anything.
I would hope
so,
not. Man.
But anyway, I forget where I was going with that story. But
That
something
fathers
made
are
me
also
think of it.
supposed to be nurturing.
Nurturing.
Yeah. So I don't know why I brought that up, but now
Well,
I will
because
say
you mentioned that sons needed, I forget the word that the study used.
that
but
tenderness.
yeah.
Yes. Now I will say, my mom whipped us too, but generally it was dad. But also,
Yeah.
I mean, even
dads
into
are
my
stronger.
yeah, well,
They can
yeah.
make it hurt more.
Yeah, but my dad, even like into my adult life, I talk to my mom regularly too, but like I significantly talk to my dad a lot more just about, just like advice and different things. So, and that was a lot more the case now than during my childhood. And it wasn't because I was, like terrified of him or anything. It's just, you go kind of, I don't know what it is, but then
I
you go through like stages where you kind of distance
where
yourself
your
from.
parents don't know anything, and then
Yeah.
you realize they knew a lot more than you thought they did.
But yeah, I mean, there's just certain things that, I wouldn't even looking back have necessarily have thought that my dad was as tender about like giving advice on those things, but he was, and so I think that's kind of like a clear need that sons need from their dad to know that their dad's not just gonna beat on them or be there as this dictator, for lack of a better way to put it.
I think the other thing about children is generally we think about, especially in the verses where we talked about children obey your parents, I think at some point we get that autonomy to where we don't have to, if they tell us that we have to do something, we might want to, consider their wishes, but obedience at that point I think is different. But in sticking in 1 Timothy chapter 5, specifically talking about widows there, but I think the application is broader. It says, but if a widow has children or grandchildren, let them first learn to show godliness to their own household and to make some return to their parents, for this is pleasing in the sight of God. There is a I think it's natural. There's a natural circle here that's like you are taken care of here, and then they nurture you until a certain age, and then you're out on your own, and then you're nurturing your own, but then you get to a point to where they're needing help and they're needing nurturing a different way and help. And it says right here, everything we see, and I think I've heard you say it for sure in a sermon, is like, if this says it's pleasing to God, shouldn't we
Yeah.
attempt to do
Why
it?
would we not want
Yeah,
to?
and in this case, it's saying, you know, and make some return to their parents. It's like the expectation is you do give back to. Now you don't neglect your own family, but
Yeah.
you know what I mean.
Take
I
care of
think
them somehow.
as adult
Yeah.
children, we have a responsibility to our parents to honor them as is commanded
Yeah.
there in. Is it Colossians that he says honor your parents in all things, or is it?
Well, I know Ephesians says
Okay,
that.
honor,
Yeah.
and
I don't
Colossians
remember.
says obey your parents in
Yeah,
all things,
yeah.
Yes.
which means all things when you're under their authority. You know,
Yeah.
it's like you can't really pick and choose. But going back to, you're still their children. Your relationship has changed, but I think the expectation is there's,
Yeah.
you know, that expectation that you help them.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Well, I think there's also this idea. I don't even know if it's modern or anything, but that once you turn 18 or once you become an adult, that you don't have to listen to your parents anymore. And I don't think we really see that. I mean, if you interpret the word like children to mean under 18, then, you know, I guess so. But also, I mean, we see consistently more passages about honoring your parents, and that applies to adults as well. You know, I'm not just going to go out and disrespect my parents once I turn 18 or
Yeah.
once
Well,
I become
yeah.
an adult. It doesn't mean that you necessarily
Well, Jesus
agree with everything.
Yeah, and Jesus
But-
talked about that when he accused the Pharisees of, you know, not giving back to not giving some to their parents, because they would say, "Well, I'm giving it to Corban,
Corban,
which
yeah.
is offering to God."
Mhm.
And his point is, you need to be taking care of these
Yeah,
people.
yeah.
So I think that is true. Now, I don't know. I still say that I don't have to obey everything that they tell me
Yeah,
to do
they don't
as an
get to
adult.
dictate
Yes,
everything
but I think
at
you
that
do
we
point.
should still like
their-
honor and
Yeah,
respect them. Was
exactly.
my point.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, and honestly, this is probably a little bit of a stretch. I feel like I've, you know, need my parents now in adulthood more than I did, you know,
Yeah.
with my math
Yeah.
homework when I was
Yeah.
in 4th grade. But
Well, and I think that's a part of the growth process too, is like you all were talking about, when you're a child, you don't understand why they do the things that they do.
Mhm.
And then you become an adult, and retrospectively you have that appreciation. And so then you're like, oh, well, why don't I go ask them about this? Because they would probably have some good advice about it.
well, I would say that with one caveat, kind of where we started talking about like broken and divorced homes.
Yeah.
Sometimes the reason that, now I'm not talking if the parent has done something specifically to ostracize that relationship, but in a general sense, if like they've just been spoken bad of, then years later when that child becomes an adult, you know, they're not going to just probably up and call
Yeah.
that parent for advice, even though
I think
Yeah.
it goes back to the relationship.
Yes.
You know, and I think that's the point is if you have a relationship where you would call or reach out to
Right.
them, I think you do, because you're like, oh, I now know, because you had that relationship then. Typically in that situation, they probably wouldn't even have had the relationship where the parent did something
Yeah. Yeah.
or tried to teach them a
Yeah.
teaching moment. And I think that's where we come back and say, oh, I don't remember everything, those teaching moments, but the principles are there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. I was just saying the pointing out the
Yeah,
necessity of that
agreed.
relationship
Yeah.
so
Yes.
that when they become adult, you know, a lot of people, you know, our age and younger, they just feel really isolated, feel like they have no help in the world because, and a lot of times,
Yeah.
they may not have a mom or a dad that they can reach out to for help with these things. And so that, you know, there aren't but so many people in their lives that can really give them sound advice and especially important, give them sound godly advice
Yeah.
on these things or what God says on the matter.
Yeah.
Okay. Anything else on children?
Well, I was just going to say, which, as we've talked about, it's very difficult for children to do this while they're children. But to understand the impact on the home that they can have. Because when you have a child that is submissive and obedient and not rebellious, the whole home life, family dynamic goes a lot smoother. Now, that doesn't mean, you know,
Yeah.
like I don't think you and your sister were probably particularly rebellious children, judging by how you turned out.
Thanks.
I could be wrong. But that doesn't mean that there's not still going to be issues, but it can make the lives of everybody in the home a lot better or a lot worse.
I just wanted you to know that I inherited from my father that I am the model child, and perhaps Lucas will also inherit that gene.
I wanted to add on to that is I think that you see some parents don't correct it,
Yeah.
and it just gets worse. And then when they become an adult, what are they teaching their kids?
Yeah.
You know, it's like, I think going back to that spareth not the rod, whether it's physical discipline or just
Yeah.
They need limits and boundaries.
You need to discipline
Yeah.
it. You just
Yep.
can't let
Well,
it go
and
and
that-
say, you know,
Yeah. And that goes back to, I think, the knowing your child thing. Like,
everyone's different.
my brother, I love him to death. He is very hard-headed.
Hard-headed.
And so it was like, for him to understand something, it like he had to get a whooping for
That's
it.
like me
Especially
and Reggie,
when he was
except
little.
for I was the hard. Reggie
Oh,
was
really?
yes.
Yeah.
It was,
And then since I was the younger brother,
see, it was opposite for us.
I saw
That's how it worked for me,
what
too.
he went through, and I'm like, well, I don't want to get whooped, so I guess I'll avoid doing what he did and maybe listen a little bit better than he did. And so you have to recognize the different dynamics between the different children and how you go about punishing them. Because, like, I remember one time I was with my sister and her family, and they were up in Fort Bragg, I think, at the time, because he was in the military. Her husband was in the military. And they had two daughters at the time, Carly and Kylie. Carly's the oldest. And I would say, at least at that point in time, when it came to their father, Carly was a little more hard-headed, and he had to be more stern with her. But Kylie, I remember one time she did something. I don't remember what it was, but she did something that Keith, her dad, had told her not to do. And he just went, Kylie, and like pointed at her and looked at her, and she just bawled. Like he didn't do anything to her other than say her name and draw attention to the fact that she was doing what he told her not to do. So it's like, you can have kids that respond to all sorts of different things.
Yep.
And I think that's one of the challenges of parenthood, is figuring out what works for that kid.
Good luck to us in the next few years.
Yeah.
Yeah, because Lucas and Hazel going to be getting, I mean, they're already getting into the cabinets and everything, but all right, anything else before we kind of split this one up?
I don't think so.
All right, well, as usual, we thought we'd be able to combine this one, but we were a little long-winded.
All good stuff, though. I don't think there were
Agreed.
too many rabbit holes,
No,
honestly.
no.
I don't even think the word was used today until now.
Oh, rabbit
I don't
hole?
remember rabbit hole.
Besides the story with the bullwhip.
But you didn't use the word.
I didn't, and I'm still not going to. That was relevant, talking about fatherly
Indiana Jones
lack of fatherly discipline. So, but yeah. Okay, well, we will finish up husbands and wives and the rest of this part on the home next time. But as for fathers, mothers, and children, you can consider this the conclusion of the matter.